Welcome back to Plague Scythe Studios, everyone. Ryan here today with another tubes versus digital amp shootout. Today's contestant is the Mesa Boogie Mark IV. This one was requested quite a few times, so knew I had to get to this one first. And today's results are very interesting, even more so than the last shootout that was performed. We have 5 contestants in total yet again, and let's just go ahead and get into it. I'll let you hear the samples. Of course, all 5 pitted against each other without you knowing which is which, so I'll let you kind of form your opinion on which one you think sounds best, and then I will reveal what piece of gear was used and which one was which track. I have to say before going forward that I'm impressed with every single piece of gear using this comparison, and that's something I couldn't say last time with the rectifier. I may not be able to recommend every one of them to everyone, but I can recommend all of them to someone because they all have their individual use cases and they pretty much nail the Mesa Mark sound in one way or another, which is a feat to be celebrated because of the weird design of this amp. Now with like the rectifier or even most plexi type amps, they really are your straightforward master volume, gain, bass, middle, treble presence. You turn up the gain if you want more gain. If it's too flubby and you don't really like the sound of plugging straight into it, too bad. You're going to have to get a pedal to tighten up the low end and boost your mids and highs, whatever you're trying to do to get that metal sound. But for the Boogie Mark series, what made these so infamous, especially the Mark II, C+ back in the 80s, was that you didn't need an overdrive pedal or anything in front of the amp. Number one, it is super high gain. Number two is that the EQ is really EQing your guitar, which is really fundamentally different from the way most amplifiers work. Not only is the tone stack different from most amplifiers, but your EQ actually comes in the form of a 5-band slider EQ after the preamp. And they affect really different frequencies than most guitar amps do. So you have 80, 240, 750, 2200, 6600. Most Marshall type amplifiers kind of are more in the 400 to 500 hertz range, as well as kind of the 4000 hertz range. So you get a very different sound from this overall, especially once you cut the bass, boost your mids, and boost the treble, get a lot of drive. That's pretty much the direct in metal sound that you're going to be hearing throughout all of this. All of the settings are as you see here that you're hearing in the recording. Because of this straight to the amp philosophy, all the tones you hear in this video, try to adhere to that rule as closely as possible. There were a couple instances where I kind of had to help out the amp in one way or another, or the amp simulation, but really there's no clipping diode pedals, no tube screamers going, nothing like that. It's just some EQ tricks for the most part, but of course we'll dive into that soon enough. So let's meet all the contestants that are trying to take the spot of the Boogie Mark IV. Contestant number 1, or more accurately 1A and 1B, is the Mooer Micro Preamp 008 Cali Mark III, accompanied by the Mooer Pure Boost. And I'm using the Pure Boost for the exact reason I just said a moment ago. Some of these amp simulations you got to help out, but once you do, the results are phenomenal in my opinion. So like last time, we're looking at another Mooer Micro Preamp pedal that I've given glowing reviews for. Has both a lead channel and clean channel. They sound great. You can use it with a emulated cabinet as well if you want to do that, but for this instance, this is going straight through the effects loop of this amp, so you're getting some tube power amp sound, which does help the tone. Unfortunately, it's practically impossible to fit all this functionality in this form factor. So I think what Mooer did was kind of give us a middle of the road gain option. It's not too flubby, it's not too crunchy, something that'll take pedals really well, something that is voiced more like other amplifiers, which does kind of take away some of the magic of the Mark series, but it gives you a really good platform to build off nonetheless. And then basically your 5-band EQ is crammed into 3. but still works rather well, I find. So to help it out, we're using the Mooer Clean Boost, which is basically just an op amp clean boost, nothing too special, but it does have a treble and bass control, so it doesn't really touch your mids, which is exactly what I wanted, since we're kind of preserving them here. So we got a good, decent boost on the treble, a nice cut on the bass, and that will just give a little bit more volume and output to get the crunch, and works really well, I think. Our second contestant is one that you no doubt saw coming from a mile away. It is the Fractal AX8 using the USA Lead Bright model, which is basically the Mark IV with this bright switch pulled out, which is what I'm using here. The only thing that's really kind of weird about this model compared to the real thing, I find, is that the EQ doesn't dial in quite the same. I find you have to lower the entire level and then kind of go from there, and you can kind of match the overall shape, and you'll get more or less pretty close. Also made some tweaks to the power amp section to bring it more in line with what I think the resonant frequency sound is of this whole system I'm using here, because I am using a load box instead of the actual cabinet, which is going to change a few things, but nothing too dramatically. But overall, I think it does quite a good job in emulating it, as do all Fractal models. Contestants 3 and 4 live in VST plugin land, and I'm hoping that you're familiar with at least one of them. That is Mercuriall's Re-Axis plugin. And this is actually an emulation of the Tri-Axis preamp. So it's not exactly a Mesa Mark series, but it does have quite a few channels of it are a Mesa Mark preamp circuitry. So the yellow channel on the lead section is a Mesa Boogie Mark II C+, which is what these are all kind of spawned from. And the results are really good, as I've shown in a prior review of that. If you want to check that out, it is a premium plugin, so it's not something you can just download and keep forever for free, but I think the results speak for themselves, and that it's probably worth it for a lot of people out there. Now, it is just a preamp, but there's a power amp emulation in that software as well, so it kind of takes care of the whole equivalent rig if you were to run that in real life. Finally, our last plugin is a free VST simply titled Mark III, created by Taranov, and we've taken a look at a couple of his plugins in the past. Just like the Mooer Mark III, this doesn't exactly have all the controls of this amp, really. The EQ is doing the slider's job, and the gain is kind of doing the same thing this is. It's just kind of your middle-of-the-road gain option. Because of that, I also helped it out with some pre-EQ, as well as some post-EQ, because I felt that the frequencies didn't line up with what the sliders do. This is probably a VST that was created just by kind of getting a overall gain and clipping profile of an amp and matching the EQ at a certain stage. It's kind of how a lot of VSTs are made. Because of that, it doesn't match the voicing once you change all the knobs around. But I try to stay away from post EQ on everything except for the plugins, because I feel like post EQ in that application is something that you kind of have to do, or something that I would do natively. With all the other real gear, I try to stay with everything that's just on the board itself or on the face of the amp, because, you know, less is more sometimes when you're trying to just get a good direct sound. I'm not exactly sure what the legality is of using the Boogie copyrighted logo on something that's not sanctioned by them, but hey, it's Russian, who cares? So with that, the big reveal. When I was first listening to the results of this test, I was just flabbergasted. I mean, something like this has no right to be keeping up so well with the real deal, but it does. And I feel like everything compared to the real amp, minus maybe the free VST plugin compared to the pull-in alternative, did a better job than even with the rectifier test. So good marks all around. Literally, I didn't mean like Mark amp, but yeah, we'll go with that, no pun intended. My favorite sound-wise was the real amp. Hard to beat this thing. It doesn't have quite as much gain on tap compared to the modelers when you have it on the same setting. I'm assuming a lot of that's going to come down to tubes, as well as variance in potentiometers and how they're affected by all the, the circuitry errors and all that. But this particular amp is just awesome. I mean, every frequency has the right amount of definition, and you can sculpt so many tones out of it. Love it. It's truly a masterpiece of a design. Unfortunately, if you're not going to buy a used Mark IV, you're going to be spending a good chunk of change on the Mark V. The cheapest Mark V brand new is the Mark V 25. Awesome amp. It's even smaller. You can get a 2x12 like vertical cabinet for it. It'll fit it just perfectly. I think it's like the best gigging amp for small clubs and bedroom practice. It's got like a power soak on it, but that thing's $1,500. You want to go up to the 35 or the full-blown 8,500 watt, whatever that 90 watt, whatever that is, you're going to be spending, well over $2,500 at that point. So if that's what you want to do, great. But value per dollar is not there compared to some of the sounds you're going to get elsewhere. Of course, if you need MIDI switching and 3 channels and all these other options, and yeah, it can definitely be worth it. But yeah, the tones definitely speak for themselves. I just can't say that everyone needs to go get the real amp because of the results of this test. Speaking of which, huge round of applause to Mooer. Damn, this is the best I've ever heard this combination. Something about this power amp through that impulse response, everything, it's like a clone. I super doubt I could have told that there was a difference in a mix environment. And even if you already have the real thing, go out and get one of these just for a backup. Like if something happens, here's a great direct-to-board option. Of course, I would definitely recommend that you grab a Pure Boost as well because of the limitations we discussed earlier with the tone stack, but you're looking at like 35, 40 bucks for this. You're looking $80 used, 100 new. There's no excuse not to have one if you have compatible gear, I feel like. If you have a solid state amp, or even you play through a PC most of the time and you're looking for a boogie sound, it's hard to pass up 120 bucks for that kind of tone. So yeah, super impressed with this, and I will definitely be keeping my eyes open for more preamp pedals as they're released. The AX8 definitely performed great here as well, as it always does, although the EQ wasn't spot on, and I feel like if I'd tweaked it maybe for another day or two just to get the feel down, I could have gotten a little closer. I find the AX8 models on all the Mark series just to be a little smoother compared to the real deal. That's not a bad thing, it's just different, and I honestly feel like the AX8 is the better direct-to-recording application because you have to do less to the signal. Like with this, you kind of got to chop off some low end because it's interfering with the bass. The high end's a little scratchy if you put it in a mix, but the AX8, it's like throw on your settings, get a decent V curve, you're done. It sounds perfect. On its own, I still prefer the real amp, but that's why I've recorded so much stuff with that exact model. The double-edged sword with Fractal gear in general is that you have so many parameters that you can tweak that you can get basically dead on with enough time to even an individual amp with all of its circuitry errors and all that. The problem is that if you do miss some of those, you are missing that extra bit of special sauce that makes your amp its own. And I think that's kind of what happened here. I wasn't able to get the EQ perfect. I wasn't able to get the resonance exactly the same way this amp has it. But I think if I was to not limit myself to using post EQ like in Cubase, then I probably could have got it just that much closer. But I try to stick with everything that was in the box and just do an amp versus amp comparison. So still have no qualms about using the AX8 in a recording situation or live as an alternative, just because, again, you do have to do less to it, I feel, and it sounds freaking awesome. And it sounds like a Mark amp, and there's no two ways about it. You could probably go buy another Mark IV used, and it may sound more like it because of, again, that variation. So love it. As always, I would recommend the AX8 and products like it to everyone who is getting a little bit more serious about either recording or playing live, and you want all those high quality effects. And of course, hundreds of other high quality amp models. Isn't just, looking at how well it does the Mark IV. It does everything so well. So as always, it gets a huge recommendation for me for the people that would like to spend that kind of money on it. As far as plugins go, I think I mostly succinctly summed up my views on Reaxis and its review. If you'd like to see its full feature list and all that, and go check out the review I have. But as far as the Mark portion, simulation of that goes, I'm super impressed. knocked it out of the park. It is an uncanny territory. I might even lose a a mix to mix comparison between the real amp and that, even more so than comparing the AX8, because the EQ and the feel is just dead on. So if you need a direct to computer application and you don't mind spending some money on a plug-in, it is so worth it, because for a premium plug-in, I feel like it does a better job than any other Mesa plug-in that I've played with that costs money. You have a extensive list of other high quality effects it comes with, including chorus, delay, reverb. You can use your own IRs, you can use your own reverb IR, which is super cool. Has some stomp boxes, all that good stuff. You can check that out, and I think it's just a really good value. So for those of you that do need I take a laptop out and a USB interface, and that's my rig kind of thing, and you need a good recording sound, there you go. It's fairly affordable and very high in value. Finally, the Mark III plugin I think is a valiant effort. I did have to help it out a little bit in the same way that I helped the Mark III pedal. Gave it a bit of a high boost, low cut, a little bit of a mid boost, not much. Then did a post EQ to kind of emulate what is going on here. Still probably could have improved the overall sound, but you can only do so much to something like that. The EQ that's on the amp that I used is definitely not intuitive, so you're going to have to tweak it a lot. And if you're not familiar with the Mark sound, it may give you some problems, because either A, you've never used a Mark amp and you don't know what it's supposed to sound like, so you're going to think it sounds like crap, or you do know what it sounds like and you might be frustrated that you don't know how to get there. So if you're not familiar with them and you do want to kind of ease into trying out some Mark sounds, it's not a bad avenue to start off with, since it is free. Just keep that in mind, that it's a very thin vertical slice of the Boogie sound, and that it's more of a platform to use as your overall distortion tone. But yeah, it's free, so it's hard to complain about. But I would love to see a bit of a rival in that space, or at least something in between the Amplitude premium emulation and free VST plugins that are okay but don't exactly get to that status of emulation. So hey, Mercuriall, next thing you want to work on that'd be really cool, since you've done such a good job so far. So yeah, that's pretty much it. As like the last time, I definitely would never get rid of this amp, but everything in this Shootout works so well for its particular use case that I can recommend every one of them. So very happy ending for this one. So we'll call that a video. Thanks for watching. Thanks for the suggestion. I'd planned on doing this anyhow, but did get some really good feedback from the audience. So appreciate that. If you got other ideas for shit I already have, then continue to leave them down below. I'll look at them, and appreciate you watching as always. We'll see you next time. Bye.